The war, a ravenous beast, was drawing its final shuddering breaths, the Allied advance, a relentless tide consuming the land. Across the collapsing edifice of the Reich, a silent exodus began. SS women, guardians of brutality, deserting their posts. Documents turned to ash. Uniforms, symbols of chilling authority, vanished into the shadows. The women themselves, phantoms fading into the ravaged landscape. Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, Majdanek, Stutthof. These names echoed with unspeakable acts. Yet the perpetrators, women who held absolute power within those walls, now sought anonymity. Their names, mere footnotes in wartime reports, masked unanswered questions. Where did they go, these female overseers of despair after the Third Reich crumbled? How did the victors pursue them? This is their story, a chilling testament to the capacity for darkness nestled within the seemingly ordinary. To understand this history, we must unflinchingly confront the unsettling truth. Women were at the heart of the Third Reich's terror. The inclusion of women into the Nazis' apparatus of repression, an area often overlooked. While the annals of history are replete with the names of male architects of terror, Himmler, Höss, and others, the roles of approximately 3,500 women who acted as vital gears within the extermination machine has been grossly underreported. This challenges our simplistic notion that sees evil and malevolence exclusively as a male domain. The recruitment of these women, concealed behind a veil of deceptive promises, began as early as 1939. Adverts were placed in German newspapers seeking women between the ages of 20 and 40. The adverts promised employment at a military base for healthy young women with good pay, plentiful food, decent accommodation, and free clothing. Deceitful in their nature, what these adverts concealed was that the job entailed overseeing the darkest camps, and that the free clothing would be the cold and callous SS uniform. It wasn't purely about ideology. For some, it was a stark economic choice. To impoverished young women, often with little to no education or experience, a job at a concentration camp represented security and the glimmer of a brighter future compared to the drab and desolate factory work available. It represented economic independence. Yet, to suggest that economics was the sole driver would be a profound disservice to the truth. Indoctrination played a key role. Many recruits were already fervent believers, moulded by the Nazi youth movements, their minds fertile ground for poisonous racial theories. These women, hardened and radicalized, would go on to perform acts of unimaginable horror within the concentration camps. Ravensbrück, a bleak and brutal landscape in northern Germany, became the crucible, where ordinary women were forged into instruments of terror. This was where the future female guards were trained and moulded, an intensive and condensed 4-week course comprising of intense ideological indoctrination coupled with brutal practical training. The program designed to transform these women into efficient and ruthless cogs in the machinery of extermination. They were taught to perceive the prisoners as subhuman, to wield punishment without faltering, and to maintain absolute control. The training included administration, crowd control, weapons handling, interrogation techniques, and the installation of Aryan supremacy and the necessity of purifying the German nation. After training, these women were dispersed through the Nazi camp network. Their impact went far beyond the simple overseeing of barracks and workspaces. They participated in selections, decisions that decided the fate of new arrivals. They orchestrated humiliating searches. They administered punishments and oversaw meagre rations and supervised the logistics of the systematic and industrial extermination. Despite being subservient to their male commanders, within the hierarchical system, these female guards occupied intermediate roles, with absolute authority over female prisoners. This created a situation described by historians as microcosms of absolute power, whereby young women, often barely out of their teens, wielded life or death control over thousands of souls. For some, the power to inflict suffering became a perverse form of empowerment. The capacity to wield death and torment became addictive. Figures like Maria Mandel were the blueprint of what could be achieved in the system, a chief supervisor at Auschwitz, with the rank of SS Oberaufseherin. Mandel was responsible for the entire female section of Birkenau. She implemented collective punishments and personally selected victims for the horrific experiments of Dr. Josef Mengele. Her capacity for implementing systematic terror was the driver of her success. Her efficiency in terror, the metric that drove her career. The story of Irma Gries is one of the most harrowing. She was recruited at the tender age of 18. Her ascent through the ranks was nothing short of meteoric. By the time she reached the age of 20, she was supervising a sector containing 30,000 Jewish prisoners. Her youth amplified the contrast with the level of depravity she inflicted. She used a riding whip to mutilate the breasts of attractive prisoners. She trained her dog specifically to attack inmates, and she personally selected victims for the gas chambers, based on arbitrary features such as the envy of particularly beautiful hair. Such sadism poses challenging questions about our view of human behaviour. The violence that was perpetrated in these concentration camps was not arbitrary. The repeated rotation of female guards between various camps was part of a strategy to normalise and increase the level of depravity required by the guards. A female guard might start at Ravensbrück, where she would begin with predominantly administrative tasks. She may then be transferred to Auschwitz, where the industrialised nature of extermination demanded a greater level of dehumanisation. Finally, she may end up at Bergen-Belsen, overseeing conditions designed to ensure death via starvation and disease. The recovered performance evaluations reveal that promotion was determined by a willingness to administer the most severe punishments. Without hesitation, Jana Bormann was assessed positively because she demonstrated the required firmness towards subhuman elements. This bureaucratic instrumentalization of female violence was one of the most perverse innovations of the Nazi system. The final months of the Reich, a tapestry of desperation and denial, brought with them a sense of impending doom. The Allied armies relentlessly advanced. The final stages, started in 1944 and stretched into the first months of 1945, caused a wide range of reactions from the guards. Some were fully aware that defeat was looming, and they abandoned their posts, hoping to blend into society. Some, who were more entrenched in Nazi ideology, remained at their posts and continued their work until the very last moment. Documentation recovered after the war tells a story of Bergen-Belsen, where guards were deliberately starving prisoners during the week leading up to the camp's liberation, despite the fact that Germany's fate had been sealed. The Reich was collapsing, and the hunt for the SS guards was on. May 1945 marked the fall of the Third Reich. The aftermath was one of chaos and confusion. The senior figures of the regime tried to flee or kill themselves. The junior figures, including the female guards, now faced an uncertain future in a Germany occupied by the Allied forces, who were ready to settle accounts for the crimes discovered. The first prisoners were captured during the liberation. The British liberated Bergen-Belsen on the 15th of April 1945. The story is documented by military records and historical photographs. Soldiers from the 11th Armoured Regiment were met with an apocalyptic scene of approximately 10,000 unburied bodies, strewn amongst the barracks filled with the dying prisoners. The horrific scenes caused a visceral reaction among the veteran troops. The British soldiers arrested 47 SS officers, including 21 women. These scenes are immortalised in photographs. These photographs show guards, such as Irma Gries, Elisabeth Falkenrath, and Herta Ehlert. They are lined up in a formation, with prisoners lying around them that were victims of their treatment. Major Norman Wickham reported the inability of the guards to comprehend the gravity of their situation. He wrote about attitudes ranging from the indignation at being arrested to the expectation of being treated in a privileged manner. While the British soldiers were liberating Bergen-Belsen, the American troops were liberating Buchenwald and Dachau, and the Red Army had discovered Auschwitz and Majdanek. The same pattern repeated itself at each of the camps, prisoners trying to blend in, uniforms discarded, attempts to escape, and violent arrests by the prisoners who had identified their torturers. At Stutthof, some guards were lynched by the prisoners before the Soviets could intervene, highlighting the intense levels of hatred accumulated by the guards. The task of identifying fugitive guards was a significant challenge. The female guards were not high-ranking officers. Often, they did not appear in public and they had no visibility. This made it simple for them to disappear into the displaced population. The Allies implemented methodologies for finding and identifying these women. Survivors played a fundamental role by directly pointing out the perpetrators or by giving accurate descriptions of these women. The testimony of prisoners who had been working in administration with access to records proved particularly important. They often knew the full names and positions of the guards. Catherine Niger, a 23-year-old survivor from the Czech Republic, gave fundamental information. She identified Eilert and linked her to multiple murders at Bergen-Belsen. Documentation, seized from the SS offices, provided more useful evidence. Payroll records, performance evaluations, and transfer logs between the camps were used to make a preliminary list of sought-after guards. The Ravensbrück files, which detailed the initial training of all guards, proved especially useful. Denazification programs, implemented in occupied areas, involved compulsory questionnaires where residents had to declare their affiliations. These documents were cross-checked with the wanted lists to identify those who had lied about their background, leading to arrests in the summer and autumn of 1945. Conditions in detention varied depending on the occupying zone. The British and Americans detained the guards in makeshift facilities, including the camps where they had served. Irma Gries was confined to a barracks which had previously housed SS personnel. This resulted in a reversal of circumstances. The Soviets took a tougher approach. Prisoners were sent to interrogation centres in Berlin, Krakow and Moscow, where aggressive tactics were used to extract confessions, often producing information which had questionable evidential value. Soviet documentation revealed that approximately 250 guards were detained in the Eastern Zone, with a higher mortality rate than in the Western zones. The guards were made to clean up the camps and were made to face the physical consequences of their actions. The historical photographs show Hertha Botha carrying corpses for mass burial at Bergen-Belsen. This work was done without gloves, due to explicit orders from the British authorities. Both would describe this experience as traumatic, mentioning that her greatest fear was contracting typhus while handling corpses. Initial interrogation revealed consistent defence patterns among the guards. Most claimed to only be performing administrative roles. Most denied knowledge of the mass exterminations and claimed to have treated the prisoners humanely within the limitations imposed by their superiors. Some resorted to minimization strategies when confronted with specific information, such as claiming they were only following orders. Gries constituted a notable exception. She remained defiant and expressed her ongoing ideological loyalty to Nazism. By the end of 1945, approximately 1,000 guards were in Allied custody, representing less than 30% of the estimated total. The rest remained fugitives, with forged documents, often living in the Bavarian Alpine region. The relative ease with which these people evaded justice raises questions about the level of priority assigned to their capture. Meanwhile, the occupying forces debated how to prosecute these crimes, which had no historical precedents. The emerging idea of crimes against humanity required precise legal articulation. Whilst logistical concerns regarding the capability of the military, judicial system posed practical dilemmas. The trials of the female camp guards represent an unprecedented moment. Whilst the Nuremberg trials prosecuted the chief figures in the regime, Smaller trials were held by the occupying powers to try the individuals responsible for the atrocities, the men and women who served as guards and supervisors. The first trial against the female guards was the Bergen-Belsen trial, which started on the 17th of September 1945 at Lüneburg, under the jurisdiction of the British. The accused numbered 45 and included 16 women: Irma Griese, Elisabeth Volkenrath, Juana Bormann, and Herta Ehlert. The military tribunal was presided over by Major General H.P.M. Bernie Ficklin. It articulated the individual responsibility for crimes committed under state authority. The charges were deliberately limited to Allied citizens to avoid legal issues caused by trying people for crimes against German or stateless citizens. The testimonies painted a picture of systemized brutality with direct female participation. Anita Lasker-Wallfisch, a survivor from Auschwitz, testified how Irma Griese had personally selected victims for the barbaric medical experiments based on their physical attractiveness. Dora Zafran detailed how she had witnessed Griese unleashing trained dogs onto pregnant prisoners. The defense followed a similar pattern across all of the accused. Irma Griese built her argument on 3 pillars: youth and inexperience, obedience to superiors, and factual denial of the accusations. On the 17th of November 1945, the court announced its verdicts. Griese, Volkenrath, Bormann, and 8 others were sentenced to death for war crimes. The execution was scheduled for December. This allowed for formal appeals, although the likelihood of a different outcome was unlikely. The final days of the condemned were meticulously documented by British military chaplain T.J. Williams. Williams reported that Griese appeared more concerned with her physical appearance than she did with her death. On the 13th of December 1945, Griese was hanged at Hameln prison, becoming the youngest war criminal to be executed under British jurisdiction. Her final words were an order to the executioner, to Schnell. Albert Pierrepoint, who was the official executioner, executed 200 Nazi war criminals. He reported that Griese approached the gallows as though she was arriving at a party and showed no fear. In Poland, the Auschwitz trial was taking place, under the Soviet-Polish jurisdiction. Maria Mandel, who supervised the female section of Auschwitz-Birkenau, was tried alongside 39 other camp officers. The evidence showed that she had a central role in the system of extermination, including procedural innovations to increase efficiency when processing mass transports. The court heard about her direct involvement in routine selections and the selection of children for medical experiments supervised by Josef Mengele. The Supreme National Tribunal sentenced her to death on the 22nd of December 1947. She was hanged at Montelupik prison, Krakow. The Stutthof trial took place in Gdansk between April and May 1946, and another large group of guards were prosecuted: Gerda Steinhoff, Jenny van der Bachmann, Elizabeth Becker, Wanda Klaff, and Ewa Paradis. The 5 were transported for public execution by hanging on Biskupia Gorka Hill on the 4th of July 1946, and 500 Polish citizens witnessed the executions. Another case was that of Ilse Koch, the wife of Buchenwald commander Karl Otto Koch. She was not employed as a guard, but as the commander's wife. She exerted a great deal of authority over the prisoners. She was accused of selecting prisoners with tattoos, to have them killed so she could use their skin to make household objects. After an initial trial under the American jurisdiction, she received a reduced sentence, but after international outcry she was retried under the German authorities in 1951. This court sentenced her to life imprisonment, and she remained there until she committed suicide in 1967. The trials revealed recurring defense patterns that were categorized by legal historians. One of the main defenses was the argument of structural coercion, where the accused claimed they had no choice and that they were following orders under threat of severe punishment. This argument was dismissed when the evidence showed they could ask for transfers without reprimands. Another defence was the denial of knowledge. The accused claimed they were unaware of the final purpose of the camps. This was rejected due to evidence of the training they had received. Some defended themselves by claiming they only performed administrative functions and never participated in acts of violence. However, this was contradicted by the testimonies of multiple prisoners. In certain cases, they claimed they accepted the position due to financial difficulties. This argument was partially accepted, especially in cases where they were very young and had no prior history in Nazi organisations. They attempted to normalise the circumstances by claiming that conditions were difficult for everyone, including staff. This argument was rejected. Despite these legal processes, a fraction of the female guards faced legal consequences. Of the 3,500 women who served in the camps, fewer than 100 received sentences and barely a dozen were executed. Most were never identified, and the trials in Western Europe were progressively reducing, and German authorities began to take over pending cases. This happened as focus shifted from the Nazi trials to the threat of Soviet communism. The Great Escape. SS female guards evaded justice. While some of the guards were executed, the majority evaded justice. This resulted from the destruction of administrative records, the disorganisation of the occupying forces, and the shift in priorities. The chaos after the German surrender created conditions for escape and concealment. Guards could easily blend in amongst the displaced masses. For those who had not reached high-profile positions, a simple change of name sufficed to start a new life. Hildegard Neumann, a supervisor at Ravensbrück, obtained false documents and settled in a rural area in Bavaria. She later married and worked as a domestic assistant, and was never identified until her death, when relatives found a preserved SS uniform. More sophisticated routes were available to guards with the right connections. The rat lines were escape networks, organised by Nazi sympathisers and the Vatican. They were set up for male officers, but later documentation confirmed that women also used these routes. Argentina, under Juan Domingo Perón, was a destination. German communities made cultural assimilation easier and offered protection. One case was Hermine Braunsteiner, responsible for extreme brutality. After being captured in Austria, she was sentenced to 3 years and was released in 1950. She settled in New York, where she lived until being discovered by Simon Wiesenthal in 1964. The Cold War radically transformed the post-Nazi landscape. Western powers redirected strategic priorities to containing global communism. This created surprising opportunities for some guards, with valuable knowledge about Eastern Europe. Documents reveal that Hildegard Lechert was recruited by the CIA and the German intelligence service. Her experience in Soviet territories was valuable. Operation Paperclip prioritized the acquisition of technical knowledge over ethical considerations. Records revealed that Thea Müller, a logistics administrator at Ravensbrück, worked as an analyst for British intelligence services. Her involvement in documented crimes was overlooked. West Germany focused on reconstruction and showed little enthusiasm for reopening wounds. The Basic Law of 1949 set statutes of limitations for various crimes. Impunity occurred, even in prosecuted cases. Hertha Bothe, known for beating prisoners, was originally sentenced to 10 years, but was released after serving 5. Remorse for what? Did I make a mistake? No, the mistake was the concentration camp itself, but I had to go there. Otherwise they would have put me in it. That was my mistake. Johanna Langefeld facilitated her escape from custody in 1946 due to her occasional humane conduct. The majority of guards never faced legal consequences. Government protection, geopolitical opportunism, negligence, and the passage of time ensured that justice was delayed. By 1950, most fugitive guards had new identities and considered the danger over. However, organisations dedicated to locating Nazis reopened investigations. The years between 1950 and 1980 mark a period of silent reintegration for former SS guards who had evaded capture. Western Europe experienced an economic boom. The women quietly reintegrated into German society and hid their past. Those who served reduced sentences had an opportunity for reinvention. Amnesty programs, implemented by occupying powers, were driven by political considerations. The need to stabilize Germany outweighed the need to pursue perpetrators. Charlotte S., sentenced to 6 years, was released and returned to Bavaria and worked as a shop assistant. Her neighbours never knew about her participation in the camps. The reintegration of former guards involved maintaining a minimised public profile. Most sought positions with relative social invisibility. Factory workers, domestic assistants, retail assistants, secretaries, or cleaning staff. They avoided professions with scrutiny, background checks, or media visibility. Many married, adopting new surnames to make it difficult to trace them. Rural communities provided environments for anonymity. German society developed a culture of silence, creating conditions for biographical reinventions. West Germany facilitated reintegration through government policies. The denazification completion law allowed former guards to be classified in a category, regardless of evidence. Service in the camps was often recognised as legitimate work experience for retirement calculations. Silence was the ultimate strategy of survival. Former guards rarely discussed their past. Family members reported categorical denial, systematic minimisation, or justification. Psychological compartmentalisation allowed them to maintain public identities dissociated from their actions during the Nazi regime. Some developed elaborate narratives about their past. This narrative was perfected by survivors of the camp system. They presented themselves as young and naive, forced by economic circumstances and unaware of the atrocities. The absence of legal proceedings perpetuated impunity. Between 1950 and 1963, investigations into Nazi crimes declined. The statute of limitations threatened to close the possibility of justice. The surviving Jewish communities, traumatized and focused on reconstruction, lacked the resources needed to pursue perpetrators. This situation would change with organizations like the Simon Wiesenthal Center. But the period between 1950 and 1965 represented a void in prosecution. They systematically avoided international travel and maintained restricted social circles. Family documentation revealed cases where they maintained separate identities, even with spouses. The psychological impact has been studied by specialists. Testimonies documented a high incidence of alcoholism, chronic depression, anxiety, and erratic behaviours. By the late 1970s, most ex-guards had new lives. Some reached respectable positions and participated in civic associations. Functional psychological compartmentalisation allowed them to participate in social activities while suppressing memories. This 3-decade period represents systematic impunity, where silence created a space for reintegration. However, by the late 1970s, new generations began to question this silence, laying the groundwork for a final phase of justice. From the 1970s onwards, a confluence of cultural shifts, political developments, and generational awakenings began to chip away at the protective wall of silence surrounding the former SS guards. The long-established norm of systemic impunity faced unprecedented challenges as renewed investigations, belated testimonies, and a revitalized public awareness of the Holocaust forced the reopening of cases that had appeared permanently closed. Organizations specifically dedicated to the pursuit of Nazi criminals, such as the Simon Wiesenthal Center, formally established in 1977, intensified their investigative endeavours through innovative methodologies. Rather than relying solely on official documentation, which was frequently incomplete or deliberately destroyed, they adopted alternative approaches, cultivating networks of informants within specific German communities, systematically tracking family connections through civil records, meticulously scrutinizing photographic archives and comparing them to current visual evidence, and employing forensic linguistic analysis of regional accents. These techniques gradually enabled the identification of guards who had remained entirely anonymous for decades. The reopening of the trial against Hildegard Lechert, the infamous Tiger of Majdanek, became an emblematic case of this period. After serving a reduced sentence from her initial conviction, Lechert had been quietly released in 1956 and settled in West Germany, deliberately maintaining a low profile. New investigations initiated by the Düsseldorf prosecutor's office in 1975 based on recently discovered testimonies and additional documentation provided by Polish authorities once again placed Lechert before justice in what would become one of the longest trials in modern German judicial history. The Düsseldorf trial, involving Lechert and other Majdanek officials, stretched from 1975 to 1981, establishing itself as the longest judicial proceeding in the history of the Federal Republic of Germany up to that point. Over 350 witnesses, including survivors located in Israel, the United States, Australia, and various European countries, testified about the specific atrocities committed at Majdanek, directly identifying Lechert in particular acts of extreme cruelty. The revelation that stunned public opinion during the proceedings was documented evidence indicating that Lechert had been recruited as an informant for the CIA and the German intelligence service, BND, in the preceding decades, receiving tacit institutional protection in exchange for information on Eastern Europe. This instrumentalization of a war criminal for geopolitical purposes sparked significant public outrage and raised uncomfortable questions about the depth of governmental complicity in the mass evasion of justice by Nazi perpetrators. After extensive deliberation, the Düsseldorf court finally sentenced Lechert to 12 years in prison in 1981. However, surprisingly, later documentation would reveal that she also did not serve this sentence in full due to health considerations and the application of sentence reduction regulations. This apparent contradiction between the severe judicial rhetoric and the softened practical enforcement characterized numerous late cases where the advanced age of the accused and procedural complexities frequently resulted in only partial implementation of formally pronounced sentences. Parallel to these specific legal developments, a fundamental generational transformation was reshaping German society. Those born after the war, without direct guilt but as heirs to a traumatic national past, began systematically questioning the widespread silence of their parents and grandparents about the Nazi era. This phenomenon, referred to by historians as the breaking of the generational silence pact, was concretely manifested through impactful cultural productions that forced public confrontation with a deliberately suppressed past. Claude Lanzmann's documentary Shoah, released in 1985 after 9 years of production and featuring an extraordinary runtime of 9 hours, offered explicit testimonies about the internal functioning of extermination camps, providing an unignorable visual representation of the systematic mechanisms of genocide, including the previously minimized female participation in dominant narratives. Simultaneously, the television broadcast of the miniseries Holocaust by German networks in 1979 reached an estimated audience of 20 million viewers, approximately 50% of the adult West German population, definitively breaking the taboo on public debate about the genocide and generating a collective awareness demanding greater historical accountability. This new cultural atmosphere coincided with fundamental legal advances that allowed for the overcoming of procedural obstacles that had protected war criminals. The doctrine of the imprescriptibility of crimes against humanity, formally adopted by the Federal Republic of Germany in 1979, eliminated technical legal barriers that had shielded perpetrators not prosecuted immediately after the war. Additionally, developments in international jurisprudence expanded the concept of individual responsibility, gradually invalidating the defense of superior orders that so many female guards had successfully used in previous decades. The opening of Soviet archives following the relative easing of Cold War tensions provided extraordinarily valuable additional documentation to researchers. Exhaustive administrative records, meticulously maintained by camp administrators and previously inaccessible to Western researchers, revealed full names, specific assignments, and performance evaluations of female guards who had previously evaded detection. These documents often demonstrated direct involvement in selections and executions by women who for decades had presented carefully sanitized versions of their supposedly peripheral administrative roles. The case of Hermine Braunstein-Orion perfectly exemplifies this belated but relentless justice. After serving as a supervisor at Ravensbrück and Majdanek, where she was documented to have participated in mass executions and selections, Braunsteiner immigrated to Canada and later to the United States, obtaining American citizenship through marriage to a US citizen. She lived as a respectable housewife in Queens, New York, until she was casually identified by a survivor in 1964 during a journalistic investigation initiated by the New York Times. Her extradition to Germany in 1973 set a significant international precedent on the priority of prosecuting war crimes over acquired citizenship status, resulting in a life sentence following a 7-year trial that documented her direct involvement in at least 181 specific murders. The trials restarted during this period faced significant challenges inherent to the temporal distance from the events being judged. The passage of time inevitably complicated the collection of physical evidence, while key witnesses had either died or faced cognitive decline related to old age and the after effects of prolonged trauma. However, these obstacles were partially offset by significantly improved investigative methodologies, greater international cooperation among judicial agencies, and the increasing availability of previously inaccessible documentation. The pursuit of justice transcended national borders through unprecedented international judicial cooperation. In 1987, France prosecuted Ilse Steinbusch, who had served as a guard at Neuengamme before quietly settling in Alsace under an altered identity. Her identification resulted from transnational collaboration between French, German and Israeli survivor organizations, demonstrating the persistence of networks dedicated to locating perpetrators regardless of the time elapsed or geographical distances. The case established important precedents regarding universal jurisdiction for crimes against humanity, a principle later formally codified in specific national legislations. These late trials revealed distinctive psychological patterns among the accused that differed markedly from behaviours observed during the immediate post-war proceedings. Unlike the ideological arrogance and doctrinaire defences exhibited by figures such as Irma Gries in 1945, women prosecuted decades later frequently displayed genuine confusion in the face of accusations concerning people they no longer psychologically identified as themselves. They had built entirely new identities, compartmentalizing or suppressing incriminating memories to the point of notable psychological dissociation. Some, like Anna Hanel, prosecuted in 1983 for documented atrocities in Majdanek, suffered clinically significant nervous breakdowns when confronted with photographs of their SS-uniformed youth and administrative documents personally signed. Forensic psychiatric experts documented dissociative phenomena in which the accused demonstrated a genuine inability to recognize historical actions as their own, having developed elaborate psychological mechanisms to completely separate the former identity from the later constructed persona. Extensive media coverage of these late trials sparked profound public debates on fundamental concepts of justice, collective memory, and historical responsibility. For many young Germans, these proceedings represented an opportunity to finally confront a national past that had remained incompletely processed through decades of silence. German universities began offering specific courses on female participation in Nazism, while archival initiatives systematically collected survivor testimonies specifically focused on female guards, creating a substantial documentary corpus that had previously not existed. For aging Holocaust survivors, many in their 80s during these reopened proceedings, the trials perhaps represented the last chance to witness some form of accountability before their own passing. Documented testimonies reveal an extraordinary determination to testify despite advanced physical frailty, as expressed by Eva Kosinski, 86 years old, during the Frankfurt trial in 1984. "I have waited 40 years for this moment. Physically, I can barely stand. But I need her to hear my voice describing what she did, not for revenge, but for historical truth." The impact of these trials significantly transcended the individual specific cases. The prosecution of Martha Linke in Munich in 1982 inspired academic investigations specifically focused on female participation in the Nazi repressive apparatus, fundamentally challenging established assumptions about the nature of evil and gender roles. A radical re-evaluation gradually emerged of women's roles during the Third Reich, no longer viewing them as passive bystanders or circumstantial victims, but as active perpetrators, fully capable of systematized cruelty comparable to their male counterparts. By the late 1980s, institutional enthusiasm for prosecuting aging cases inevitably began to wane. Practical obstacles increased exponentially with each passing year. Witnesses continually passed away, additional documentary evidence rarely surfaced, and humanitarian concerns about prosecuting frequently ill octogenarian defendants raised ethical questions within the judicial system. The imminent collapse of the Soviet bloc in 1989 diverted public attention toward new immediate historical challenges, while German reunification in 1990 introduced urgent socio-legal priorities that appeared incongruent with the continued allocation of scarce resources toward aging war criminals. Despite these inevitable factors, the late trials against female guards of the Third Reich represented a crucial moment in the evolution of contemporary transitional justice. They established the fundamental principle that the passage of time does not absolve responsibility for systematic atrocities, creating precedents later applied in diverse contexts such as Yugoslavia, Rwanda, and Cambodia. The enduring lesson was that justice, though imperfect and delayed, retains fundamental symbolic and practical value in societies seeking to reconcile with traumatic legacies while establishing standards for future behaviour. The final chapter of this history continues to be written today. Even now, researchers at the Simon Wiesenthal Center and similar organizations persist in identifying surviving perpetrators, though their numbers decline inexorably with the natural passage of time. The meticulous documentation of these historical cases transcends the likelihood of further significant trials, serving as a permanent reminder of the consequences when moral indifference becomes institutionalized and human cruelty finds expression through bureaucratic structures that normalize collectively destructive behavior under a veneer of legitimacy. The final legacy of these women remains fundamentally ambiguous. For Holocaust survivors and their descendants, they represent the physical embodiment of the systematized evil that destroyed entire families and millennia-old communities. For historians, they constitute a crucial case study of humanity's capacity to normalize aberrant behavior through institutional context and social conformity pressures. For legal scholars, their cases established key precedents that shaped modern international humanitarian law. And for broader society, they remain a disturbing reminder of the fragility of moral inhibitions when social structures promote the systematic dehumanization of others. Perhaps the most unsettling lesson of all is the recognition that the perpetrators were not mythological monsters, but ordinary women transformed by ideological indoctrination, economic incentives, and social pressure. Fully understanding how social mechanisms turn domestic aides, nurses, and clerical workers into direct enforcers of genocidal policies remains an enduring moral and intellectual challenge, particularly relevant in contemporary societies confronting a resurgence of authoritarian movements, once again promoting rhetoric of exclusion and dehumanization. The approximately 3,500 women who served as guards in Nazi concentration camps therefore represent more than just a closed historical chapter. Their collective trajectory, from recruitment and participation in the extermination system to strategies of evading justice, silent reintegration into civil society, and eventual late confrontation with historical responsibility, provides a fundamental case study on individual responsibility in contexts of systematic state criminality. The lessons derived from their histories remain, unfortunately, relevant in a world where human rights violations continue to manifest through the everyday participation and collaboration of seemingly ordinary citizens. A chilling reminder that vigilance, moral courage, and the unwavering commitment to justice are essential safeguards against the recurrence of such horrors.